One man walked into Harley-Davidson with a plan and left a legacy no one saw coming. The bikes changed, the brand shifted, and something deeper started to crack. Was this vision or sabotage? You're about to see how a single leader may have done what rivals couldn't: break Harley from the inside. The outsider who took control. He wasn't born on a bike. He didn't grow up wrenching in a cold garage, and he didn't have Harley oil under his nails. Yet somehow, Jochen Zeitz, the man once known for saving a sneaker company, was handed the keys to the most iconic motorcycle brand in American history. The board didn't just approve him, they celebrated him. To them, Zeitz was the savior. To everyone else, especially Harley's loyal base, he was something far worse: a complete stranger. Jochen Zeitz's resume was undeniably impressive. He was the youngest CEO in the history of Puma, a German brand that had been circling the corporate drain before he took over. Under his leadership, Puma didn't just recover, it went global. Zeitz revamped marketing, slimmed down inventory, and leaned hard into the world of lifestyle branding. But Puma was fashion, Harley was a religion, and that distinction would prove fatal. Harley's board was intoxicated by Zeitz's image. He was the kind of executive who spoke in phrases like brand reinvention and emotional connection. They weren't looking for a rider, they were looking for a pitchman. When Zeitz joined the board in 2007, it raised eyebrows. When he became CEO in 2020, it dropped jaws. This was a man who had ridden across the United States exactly once. His motorcycle experience could be summed up in a single carefully crafted press release, but for Harley's leadership, that didn't matter. They weren't hunting authenticity, they were chasing transformation. For longtime Harley fans, the move felt like a betrayal. They weren't just skeptical, they were insulted. This wasn't some mid-level shift. This was the soul of the brand being handed to someone who saw it as a platform rather than a legacy. The community didn't see Jochen Zeitz as a visionary. They saw him as a branding consultant with a European accent and a marketing deck, the kind of executive who could turn nostalgia into a stock ticker. And that's exactly what he tried to do. But the board didn't hire a biker. They hired a brand whisperer. That whisper would soon become a scream, as Harley began speaking a new language, one its oldest fans could no longer understand: DEI, ESG, and the Culture Whiplash. When Harley-Davidson started sponsoring pride parades and rolling out diversity pledges, the company said it was embracing the future. But for many of its most loyal riders, it felt like something else entirely: erasure. The Jochen Zeitz era wasn't just about new products, it was about a whole new identity. And the whiplash was brutal. Under Zeitz's watch, Harley joined over 2,500 other companies in signing a pledge for DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It engaged with the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index, achieving a 90% score. It launched LGBTQ entrepreneur boot camps, supplier diversity programs, and internal employee training. It even revised its workplace policies to emphasize allyship and progressive inclusion. On paper, these were textbook corporate, social responsibility wins. But in the parking lots and bike rallies where Harley's culture had lived for over a century, the reaction was anything but applause. Forums erupted. Club members questioned whether the brand they once wore like a second skin was even speaking to them anymore. They weren't angry at the principles. They were stunned by the suddenness. There was no transition, no conversation, no nod to the culture that built the brand. Just a new script, delivered without warning. To many inside the Harley world, this wasn't about politics, it was about identity. A company built on rebellion and hard-won loyalty had suddenly started talking like a sanitized HR department. The rough edges were being buffed out. The chrome was being replaced with clean white language. Harley was losing the tension that made it magnetic. By April of 2024, the backlash had grown so intense that Harley disbanded its DEI department entirely. A quiet press release confirmed it. The social experiment was over, but the damage had already been done. You don't fix an identity crisis by deleting a department. You fix it by knowing who you're speaking to. And the harder Harley pushed progress, the faster its core riders rode away. But it wasn't just messaging that was shifting. Beneath the surface, entire parts of the company were being cut loose, and no one was ready for what came next. We dug through board memos, dealer testimony, and internal resignations. So if you want truth, not PR, hit subscribe and stay with us. The Rewire that unplugged the soul. The plan was called Rewire. Internally, it was framed as a bold correction, a hard reset for a brand drifting toward obsolescence. But for the people who made Harley what it was, Rewire felt more like a disconnection from everything that mattered. Within months of launching the initiative, Jochen Seitz oversaw the elimination of over 700 positions. Entire departments were dissolved. Longtime employees were pushed out, not with celebration, but with severance packages and cold hands. Inside the plants, the mood changed. The energy drained from the factory floors. And with every cut, the bikes lost more than parts. They lost story, soul, and continuity. The hits kept coming. Harley discontinued the Street 500 and the Street 750, its most affordable models and the only realistic entry point for thousands of new riders. These weren't just motorcycles, they were on-ramps, training wheels for a lifelong brand relationship. When they disappeared, so did the company's future base. Young riders were left with nothing to buy. Urban commuters were left behind, and Harley's claim to relevance slipped even further. The Rewire plan also aimed to exit unprofitable global markets and simplify product portfolios. In executive language, that meant efficiency. But in real terms, it meant fewer bikes, fewer options, and fewer people. What was once a community-driven company had become a machine focused solely on margin. Seitz framed Rewire as necessary, even noble. He promised it would streamline the organization and reset product launches. But what it really did was unravel Harley's connective tissue. Its link to working-class riders, entry-level consumers, and the very culture it once courted. And just when riders thought it couldn't get worse, Seitz pulled the plug on something even bigger. Rewire was only half the story. What followed was even more aggressive, a vision called Hardwire that would reshape Harley forever. Hardwire and the death of accessibility. Hardwire. The name itself suggested permanence. No off switch, no reversals. Once it was live, the current would keep flowing. Jochen Seitz's Hardwire strategy wasn't just a continuation, it was a commitment to a new Harley-Davidson. One built for investors, not riders. The plan? Double down on the big cruisers, the expensive trikes, and the heavyweight touring bikes. Invest in adventure touring. Go all in on electric vehicles and premium brand experiences. It sounded impressive on paper, but on the streets it left a brutal void. For the average American, someone earning $40,000 to $60,000 a year, Harley had nothing to offer anymore. Dealerships became galleries of unaffordable chrome. Even base models hovered near or above $20,000. And anything with special or CVO in the name could climb north of $30,000 or even $40,000 with ease. These weren't bikes for working-class rebels, these were for aging collectors and finance-approved enthusiasts. For younger riders, Hardwire was a locked door. Harley had no starter model, no sub-$10,000 bike, no reason to walk into the showroom. And during an era of rising inflation, student debt, and housing instability, Harley chose to chase luxury rather than loyalty. The metaphor was everywhere. Freedom, once a symbol of Harley's promise, now came with a loan term longer than some marriages. What used to be a dream within reach had become a status object. You didn't buy a Harley to ride anymore. You bought it to say you could. Hardwire may have pleased investors, but it slammed the door shut on the very people who kept Harley alive for generations. Harley didn't just lose affordability, it lost its future. And as the bikes disappeared from driveways and dealerships, the next blow wouldn't come from a product line, it would come from an identity crisis even deeper than anyone expected. LiveWire and the EV Misfire. This was supposed to be the bold future of Harley-Davidson, the company's big pivot, the next chapter. Instead, it became a cautionary tale on how to completely misread your audience. When Jochen Seitz greenlit the LiveWire project, the idea wasn't just to create an electric motorcycle, it was to create an entirely separate identity. LiveWire wouldn't be just another model under the Harley-Davidson name. It would be its own brand, its own company, with its own logo, its own culture, and, perhaps most disastrously, its own voice. Seitz thought he was protecting the Harley-Davidson legacy by keeping electric bikes at arm's length. But in doing so, he fractured an already fragile identity. The motorcycle community, especially Harley's core base, didn't see this as innovation. They saw it as betrayal. Harley wasn't built on silence, it was built on thunder. And the LiveWire, for all its sleek design and futuristic performance, made no sound. Literally, it didn't roar, it whirred, it didn't vibrate, it glided. For traditional riders, it was a bike in form only. The soul was missing, but that wasn't the only problem. The price tag came in at over $23,000 before taxes. That's nearly the cost of a fully loaded Toyota Corolla. And for what? A bike that no one could hear, that didn't have the torque or the culture, and wasn't even really a Harley. That sticker shock hit harder than expected, and despite glowing headlines in tech publications, the market responded with apathy. Since its launch in 2021, LiveWire has sold fewer than 3,000 units. Not per quarter, total. Inside dealerships, LiveWire became a kind of ghost. Techs didn't know what to do with them. Salespeople didn't know how to pitch them. Riders didn't know who they were for. And executives, they just doubled down. They believed in the product, but they forgot to ask whether anyone else did. The most damning thing wasn't that the LiveWire failed, it's that it confused the entire brand. If Harley was going electric, why spin it off? If Harley wasn't, why launch it at all? Was it the future or was it a decoy? For core riders, it was none of those things. It was a bike without a place. A solution to a problem no one had. What Zeitz said was protection, ended up dividing the company in half. But if LiveWire fractured Harley's product line, the language coming from the top did something worse. It broke the emotional bond that once tied Harley to its riders. And while riders felt abandoned, those left to sell the bikes were already bracing for the worst. The silence was coming, not just in the exhaust note, but in the showrooms themselves. The dealers who went dark. For decades, Harley-Davidson dealerships weren't just retail spaces, they were temples. Places where culture was traded alongside chrome, where new riders met their mentors, where Saturday events turned into small-town festivals, and where the showroom floor felt more like a clubhouse than a sales floor. But that energy doesn't survive disconnection. And under Zeitz, the current was cut. As Harley narrowed its offerings, cut its entry-level bikes, and chased a high-end market, foot traffic began to dry up. Dealerships in small towns and rural states saw the change almost immediately. One weekend, they were booked with test rides. The next, crickets. Weeks passed with no serious buyers. Events were canceled. Inventory stagnated. Dust gathered where conversation used to happen. Staff started noticing first. The same crew that once couldn't keep helmets on shelves now spent hours cleaning them just to look busy, rearranging displays, shuffling bikes around the floor, hoping someone, anyone, would walk through the door. One dealership manager in the Midwest said it best: "You can only clean helmets for so long before you hear the silence." Promotions came, then desperation. Free jackets, prepaid service plans, financing gimmicks. None of it worked, because the problem wasn't price, it was presence. The people Harley had built its name on no longer felt welcome. And the people Harley was now targeting? They weren't walking through dealership doors. One by one, locations started to shut down. Not because they hated the brand, but because the brand no longer sustained them. A Harley without community is just metal, and dealerships were the last place that community still tried to survive. But losing customers was one thing. Losing the dealers? That was the death knell. And while the community mourned, Wall Street finally caught up, because you can hide a broken heart, but not a broken balance sheet. The stock that told the truth. When the culture cracks, numbers follow. That's the rule. And by the time Harley's community had turned cold, the markets had already begun to freeze. 10 consecutive years of stock decline, multiple quarters of missed targets, shareholder questions with no satisfying answers. From the outside, Harley still looked solid. Flashy new models, big announcements, public claims about bold new directions. But behind the curtain, the numbers told a different story. Shrinking market share, reduced unit sales, international exports slipping, and worst of all, investor confidence plummeting like a thrown wrench. Wall Street analysts began issuing quiet downgrades, not because Harley lacked product, but because it lacked purpose. There was no clear target audience anymore, no compelling sales narrative. The core was gone. The boardroom may have still been optimistic, but financial institutions weren't fooled. They saw what riders saw, a brand at war with itself. And the truth is simple. Stocks don't fall for no reason. They fall when trust collapses. They fall when buyers disappear. They fall when dealers close and silence grows. And while the numbers bled, the real shock wasn't what Harley became, it was what it started charging for the privilege. From freedom machine to luxury artifact. There was a time time when Harley-Davidson was the people's bike. It was the machine you saved up for, the reward for a good season, a good job, or a good stretch of hard living. You didn't buy a Harley to show off, you bought it to ride your story into the pavement. But under Zeitz, that changed. The bikes got more expensive, a lot more expensive. Not just a few $1,000s over time, but double, sometimes triple the entry point for many would-be riders. By the year 2024, base models like the Lowrider ST hovered near $28,000 before accessories or dealer markups, and the premium CVO lineup, some broke past $100,000. Let that sink in. $100,000 for a motorcycle. For comparison, that is a down payment on a house in the Midwest. It is 2 years of tuition at a public university. It is a used Toyota Camry with under 50,000 miles and enough room for groceries and kids. Harley used to be within reach. Now it was in a display case. What Zeitz may have seen as premium brand repositioning, riders saw as a lockout. Harley became aspirational in all the wrong ways. The kind of product you admired from afar because you could no longer touch it. The brand had shifted from freedom to flex, from soul to showroom. And here's where the betrayal deepened. The quality didn't justify the price jump. Riders weren't getting radically new machines. They were getting tweaks, paint upgrades, and heritage badge work priced like designer handbags. The value equation broke, and once value breaks, belief follows. In coffee shops, forums, and garage meetups, the conversation shifted. Harley was no longer the dream. It was the relic. The price of admission was too high and the payoff felt hollow. Riders didn't want lifestyle branding. They wanted to ride. But with 12% interest rates and a base model price like a luxury SUV, many turned away because you can't sell freedom on a 12-year loan. And while longtime riders felt locked out, the next generation never got in to begin with. Why Harley lost the next generation. Motorcycle culture is inherited. You don't just buy a bike, you catch the bug. You watch your uncle wrench on one, you see a line of black leather cut through your town, you hear the rumble, and something in you lights up. That's how it starts. But for Gen Z and younger millennials, that moment never came because Harley took the on-ramp away. Entry-level bikes like the Street 500 and Street 750 were axed under Zeitz's Rewire plan. The last truly beginner-friendly American bikes, gone, replaced with high-priced cruisers, trikes, and sport tours. The cheapest way into the Harley experience now costs more than many young riders' annual income. So they went elsewhere. The Honda Rebel 1100 offered clean lines, smooth power delivery, and reliability, all at a price that didn't require a co-signer. The Royal Enfield Meteor and Interceptor delivered classic looks and heritage feel for under $7,000. Yamaha's Bolt stripped it back to the basics: power, simplicity, and low cost of ownership. These bikes weren't as loud or famous, but they were there. And for younger riders, that's all that mattered. Harley assumed its legacy would be enough, that the name alone would draw new blood. But loyalty doesn't start with a billboard, it starts with a first ride. And if you have nothing to offer new riders, you get nothing in return. This wasn't just a market oversight, it was a generational loss. The future of motorcycling moved on and Harley forgot to follow. They offered nothing affordable, nothing intuitive, and nothing resembling the cultural on-ramp that once made them a lifestyle. There was no gateway drug, so there would be no lifelong addiction. And the next brands in line? They were ready to eat Harley's lunch. Because while Harley was stuck polishing its past, its competitors were quietly rewriting the future. While Harley slept, the world moved on. Outside of Milwaukee, the motorcycle world kept spinning. Fast. Brands that once played second fiddle were now front and center because they were doing something Harley wasn't: listening. Triumph embraced its legacy without suffocating in it. The Bonneville, the Speedmaster, even the Bobber, each carried classic DNA but with modern bones. Royal Enfield went from nostalgia niche to global powerhouse. The Interceptor 650 and Meteor 350 redefined retro for a new audience. They were cheap, they were fun, they were everywhere. Indian, Harley's closest rival in spirit and silhouette, surged forward. The Scout, the Chief, the Challenger, these bikes were powerful, stylish, and most importantly, consistent. Indian didn't try to become something new every quarter. It doubled down on what riders wanted, and riders noticed. Meanwhile, Harley's export numbers stagnated. Global dealers faced the same issues as their American counterparts. Too expensive, too inconsistent, too unclear. While Royal Enfield expanded into Latin America and Southeast Asia, Harley was busy sunsetting models and chasing buzzwords. In Europe, BMW rewrote what cruisers could be. With the R18, it proved you could honor the past without being trapped by it. High performance, minimalist styling, German engineering wrapped in throwback skin. It was everything Harley used to do, done cleaner, faster, and with fewer breakdowns. Harley wasn't just falling behind, it was giving the race away. And all the while, Zeitz kept pivoting. New slogans, new reorganizations, new strategic visions. But the road doesn't care about vision statements. The road wants machines that move people, physically and emotionally. And that's what Harley forgot. While others put people back on the road, Harley kept rewriting its mission. But now, as the dust settles, a bigger truth remains. This was never just about one CEO. This was about a company that forgot who it was, and a leadership team that watched it happen. That disconnect didn't begin or end with one CEO, because behind Zeitz there was an entire boardroom silently cheering him on, until one resignation letter pulled back the curtain on it all. Jacob Dardeville and the warning ignored. Jacob Dardeville didn't look like the kind of man who makes waves, but when he walked away from Harley-Davidson's board in 2024, he set off a detonation Harley couldn't ignore. In his resignation letter, he didn't just raise concerns, he torched the entire narrative. Dardeville's letter was blunt. He described a culture depleted to the core, a company disconnected from its riders, and a leadership team more focused on buzzwords than bikes. He called out Harley's remote management model for hollowing out its community. He criticized the disappearance of senior leaders who had once defined Harley's in-the-trenches grit, and most damning of all, he pointed a shaking finger directly at Jochen Zeitz. For years, insiders had whispered about growing disillusionment inside the company, but Dardeville confirmed it. The halls were quiet, the passion was gone. Employees didn't feel connected to what Harley once meant, and dealers felt like they were selling motorcycles built by people who had never ridden one. The letter circulated fast, first inside corporate, then to the media. And while Harley never formally responded, the message was received, loud and clear. One of their own had seen the decay from the inside and chose to walk instead of watch the ship go down. The rest of the board said nothing, but the public did. Riders began quoting the letter on forums and social media. Employees started leaking internal morale surveys. It was the match thrown into the oil drum. Not just a resignation, but a revelation. And yet, Jochen Zeitz still held his position, still made decisions, still smiled for interviews, still chaired the board. But now that Zeitz is gone, can the damage be undone? This isn't just about Harley anymore. Harley-Davidson's collapse didn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of a larger story, one we're watching unfold across American brands everywhere. Bud Light, Disney, Target, each one hit the same wall. They pivoted too fast, too hard, and too far from the people who made them. What's happening isn't just a backlash. It's a rejection of whiplash branding, a revolt against brands that forget who they're speaking to. For Harley, the mistake was trying to become everything to everyone. Socially progressive, but rooted in rebellion. Tech-forward, but nostalgic. Luxury-priced, but working class at heart. You can't ride two bikes at once. Other brands have made the same mistake, abandoning clarity for trend chasing. Bud Light didn't implode because of a single ad campaign. It fell apart because the people drinking it suddenly didn't recognize the brand anymore. Disney found itself caught between decades of family-centric identity and a modern cultural battleground. Target tried to balance purpose and mass-market appeal and satisfied no one. The pattern is clear. When you lose who you are, you lose who you sell to. Harley-Davidson wasn't just a motorcycle company, it was a cultural mirror, and when it shattered that reflection, it shattered the trust of the people who once saw themselves in it. A Harley wasn't just a product, it was a promise of freedom, grit, pride, and rebellion. You could hear it in the rumble, you could feel it in your chest, you could smell it in the oil. And now that promise feels like a brochure, empty, sanitized, disconnected. Whether Harley recovers or fades into mythology will depend on whether its next chapter speaks to the heart or to the hedge fund. Because this isn't just a new model launch, this isn't just a rebrand, it's the final call. Because when you try to be for everyone, you become nothing to anyone. If this story hit home, drop a comment and subscribe before Harley's next chapter writes itself without you. Would you like a version with a more rebellious or nostalgic tone?